Amnesty International's research has found sufficient basis to conclude that Israel has committed and is continuing to commit genocide against Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip, the organization said in a landmark new report published, well, today it says in my notes, but it's yesterday. My notes are old. So today we're gonna continue talking about Amnesty International. One, because they really do deserve from the other side really another episode, because the recent report has been really despicable, and the video associated with it, we couldn't go through the whole thing yesterday, so we'll have you suffer through part of it again, and other part of it for the first time. Joining me today are Marco, Richard, and Michael Kaufman. Hey guys. And I'm just trying to remember if Marco, Richard, you were on the last episode with it about Amnesty International. But if not, Marco, before I want to spend most of the time on the video itself, but Marco, any just opening thoughts, maybe from the report or the reporting on the report itself?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't read the whole report because we discussed the previous reports, and it doesn't really matter what the report is. It's not about the content; it's about what they're actually saying. The reports are just an excuse to put certain words like apartheid, genocide, and all this kind of crap out there. It doesn't matter what it says. But the point is, that Amnesty International is part of this. Part of the altruistic industry, really. It's part of the redistribution of wealth that is occurring over there, out there, by done by supranational bodies who tell everybody how to live and who decide what's good and what's bad. They really exploit people's guilt, and they exactly profit from making people feel guilt, and they use this kind of privilege that they get, unearned privilege, by the way, and they use it in order to push their agenda, really. And we realize that their agenda includes being total anti-Semite and being totally against Israel, and the way they exploit, they use a report just to make the point that Israel is committing genocide, ignoring everything which they actually admit. They know the definition of genocide, but still they choose to define the genocide the way that suits them in order to make their own point. In the school of thought, never let facts get in the way.
And as an NGO, they've got special consultative status at the UN that they've had since 1967. So, which is not surprising, to be honest, given how closely they work with the UN for lobbying, for trying to persuade them to introduce all these anti-Israel measures, and for their pro-BDS agenda. They've even signed an open letter to the UN to try and dissuade the UN from signing up to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, whereas they're quite happy to push the alternative Islamophobia message when it comes to it being a form of racism against Muslims. So it's telling that's the way they operate. And to be honest, this one video will show you that. If you just landed from Mars, this video will show you that.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, anything you'd like to say about Amnesty International before we go into the video?
I think most of it's been said. I would just add that when you toss around words like genocide so easily, it just demeans the word, and it means it won't have any meaning going forward. And there's plenty of genocides that are actually going on and they're not talked about. But we know genocide, for example, was 6 million Jews and 4 million non-Jews killed by Hitler and the Third Reich during World War II. That's genocide. There are genocides going on now. What's happening in Gaza is called a war, and we'll get into that.
Let me also remind people that today's episode of the reality show is sponsored by James Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation and Its Consequences. More about them later, more about the book later in the video. But let's go to the video itself, because there's a lot to go through. And also thank you, PC, for a super chat. He says they need to be boycotted by Jews. I believe this is not the first time something like this happened, and a lot of I think there was a case in the past. I'm not sure if it was specifically when they rebranded the word apartheid to suit it for Israel, but I believe there was time where a lot of Jewish employees of Amnesty International have left. But let's go to the video.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
For over a year, we've witnessed utter carnage unfolding right before our eyes in the occupied Gaza Strip with no end in sight. Many have described this carnage as the first live-stream genocide, day after day. What has your government done to prevent this genocide? What have your political leaders done? What are they doing now?
Okay, so first, well, I'll make the same observation as I did from the Daily Objective yesterday. I love how they put at the start, some of the viewers might find the images disturbing, and the first thing they show is a picture of a Jew, because yeah, some of those viewers will definitely find that disturbing. But you know, I'll just mention quick few points and I'll go to you guys. I mean, first, just the dishonesty. I mean, showing Gallant that speech from Gallant was after October 7, when he said, no food, nothing, we're fighting human animals. Well, first of all, he's absolutely right. He was talking about the people who have committed October 7. If those are civilized people, if those are, you know, that's just a okay way to behave yourself, then I think you are the one who need to really check your premises. But also saying, you know, putting this in the context, like if you don't have any information about it, from what Gallant has said, you would assume there was not a single piece of humanitarian aid that came in since October 7. Again, that's faulty, and I feel stupid for even saying that, because I'm already accepting the premise that there should be any humanitarian aid. But Marco, anything you'd like to say for the first part?
I mean, honestly, the first time I saw the thing, I thought, who's this wacko woman? And then turns out she's Agnes Calamard, not to be pronounced Calamerd, who's the general secretary of Amnesty International. She used to be, funny that, a former UN special representative, the similar job to Francesca Albanese. Clearly, these guys get anti-Semitism as part of the induction course as soon as they get at the UN. I mean, the kind of stuff she's talking about a genocide. We're witnessing a genocide. Do you remember what happened over a year ago? Something else was actually live streamed live and people being killed. No, we don't care about that because it was Jews, wasn't it? So we just go straight into the phase where Israel defends itself and, as Michael pointed out, goes to war with its people. And in war, people die. That's the whole point. When every other rational way of dealing with people breaks down, you're left to war. And that's what the Gazans wanted once they went into Israel and butchered over 1,000 people. By the way, they're still holding nearly half of the hostages that they took on that very day. So if we want to talk about people in need, people who need aid, well, that's the hostages. That's the Israelis who are still held by the Gazans. But the people we are supposed to be sorry about, no way.
Well, just to jump in, because Amnesty International did ask for the release of hostages, you know, in their 300-page report on page about 280 or something. They do mention oh wait, sorry, I misread it. The release of civilian hostages, because we don't care about the IDF people who were captured on October 7th, the ones who are for all, basically who should be considered civilians. No, you can keep those, Hamas. We will compromise. Richard?
When she's talking about what has your government done, who's she talking to? Is she talking to Gazans? Is she asking what their government's done or what they've done to challenge it? Because that seems noticeably missing from the whole message behind this. No, everything's always Israel's fault. And of course, be aware at this point in the video, because we get to see some later stuff. But already you've got a montage or a collage, I don't know why all these words are French, of destruction everywhere. So you're trying to get the abstract notion of destruction in people's minds. You've therefore literally jettisoned every form of context for any of those incidents. You don't know what terrorists were in those buildings. You don't know what that was being fired from those buildings or in those sites when they were attacked. You've got nothing. You're just being shown destruction as if destruction itself is bad, even when it's of terrorists and terrorism and a military that's trying to attack you in civilian clothes. So all of that is there. And then, of course, you've got the out of context thing, like you said, of the speech of Gallant at the beginning. Now, had they stuck to that, the war would be over. Would have been over a long time ago, and the hostages would no doubt have been returned, or they would have been rescued, because the Gazans would have had no incentive at that point to, if they wanted to eat and drink, they would have given them back. And it's only the sustaining of that has allowed this to perpetuate to the extent that it has. So, but you made the points clearly on that. So, but just one more point. Notice those destruction montages and look out carefully for when in other sections of this video, when you've pulled back and you've got big long shots flying over Gaza of how much is not destroyed, because there's quite a bit of that slips out in between the cracks. Whereas this montage is designed to suggest that everything is flattened. And if that were so, once again, the war would be over. The hostages would either be returned or no more, and the conflict would have ended. But of course, because that's not true, because this message is a distortion and a lie, we're still fighting it.
Yeah, before I go to you, Michael, I'll just bring up also the name for, I think, the whole report and this video. You feel like a subhuman. I mean, well, one, I'm really wondering who did they get this quote from, like who did they heard it from, some like random Palestinian. But again, imagine like a German in 44 saying that I feel like a subhuman. Yeah, you've started a war. You started a war to annihilate like half the half the countries in Europe. You started like an active conflict, and now going into Hamas, you started a war against Israelis, and yeah, the other side will try to surprisingly end it. Yeah, I know Hamas believed that the West would call for ceasefire stronger and would defend Hamas, but no, Israel was actually able to push back despite the amount of pushback against Israel. But I mean, Michael, anything to add, or how do you feel about this title?
I think her first line is terrific. Remember, subliminal messaging is really important. So the occupied Gaza, it's an occupied territory. We're not going to mention that in 2006, there was a vote taken and the Palestinians elected Hamas over Islamic Jihad. Over the Palestinian Authority. And they elected Hamas to be their leaders. And Hamas decided that most of the aid that was coming into the country would go to militarization of the entire Gaza Strip with tunnels and munitions and so on, and not about trying to build an economy or build any kind of a flourishing life for its people. And Hamas established a beautiful charter, which talked about a one-state solution, namely a state that involved them and an annihilation of Israel. And that charter stands today. That is the charter of Hamas, to annihilate Israel. So Gaza is not occupied. Israel doesn't want to occupy Gaza. Israel pulled out. In fact, Israel moved settlers out. But that's all history, and that's under the bridge. Hamas started a war. what has your government done about it? Well, what has your Gazan government, Hamas, done about it? And the last point I'll make is that the war can end, as you guys have said, tomorrow. Very simple. You surrender. When you lose a war, this is what you do. You sign a peace treaty, you surrender, and you return the hostages or the prisoners to the other side. That's how it works when you lose a war. If you're not willing to surrender, then fine. The other side will continue to beat the heck out of you and pummel you, and maybe we need to flatten all of Gaza. And if that's required, so be it. I won't get into the whole humanitarian aid thing, which is aiding and abetting the enemy, because we all know the food first goes to Hamas, like everything else in Gaza, and then it might trickle down to the people. But this is from start to finish. Even in her first line, you know that this is completely corrupt.
We have a few super chats. So first, let me thank Dan Lips again for becoming a member. Let me thank. I already thanked PC, but I read it, so I'll read it again. They need to be boycotted by Jews. They need to be boycotted by everybody. Honestly, I mean, there should be no difference between what they are doing, and just because now they are targeting the Jews shouldn't make it that different. We also have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. He says Jim's book is excellent. Great panel today. That's a black hole in economics, money creation and its consequences. You'll hear more about them later. We also have a super chat from Ginger. Thank you so much. Super chat from Jonathan. Thank you. And a super chat from Jonathan again. Thank you so much. He says, support Ayn Rand Centre UK, 7 days a week, original programs inspired by Ayn Rand. We need your support. I'll definitely support that. And with that, let's listen a bit more.
Israel has been waging an ongoing and devastating offensive on the occupied Gaza Strip. More than 43,000 Palestinians have been killed and tens of thousands injured, nearly 2 million displaced, neighborhoods flattened, aid and life-saving supplies restricted, all sparking an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. The term genocide has increasingly been used to describe Israel's conduct in Gaza. But how can we assess whether what is happening is actually genocide?
Okay, I want to stop here before we go into him trying to define it. But I really like the saying of Israel has been waging an ongoing and devastating offensive on occupied Gaza Strip. So first, don't call it war. If we call it war, then it will be sort of like harder to explain what's actually happening. No, call it offensive. And also the occupied Gaza Strip. Again, Michael, you mentioned it. I'm occupied by who? Who is occupying Gaza? Are you trying to say that Hamas is occupying Gaza? Israel has no presence in Gaza. Israel had no presence in Gaza for more than a decade. I mean, what is this claim? And I've looked up Amnesty International, and every time they always refer to the same. When they refer to like articles or specific like topics, it's always Israel/occupied Palestinian territories. And it's like, is all of Israel for you an occupied Palestinian territory? Again, what is the implication here? Are you denying all of Israel's basically being able in this region? Because again, occupation is done by someone. You cannot just put it like anywhere and claim it as this is the fact right now. I mean, Marco, what is this?
Well, if they use proper language, this video would be over in 5 seconds, and they wouldn't be able to make the emotional statement, which is designed to override any possible logical argument that comes out by accident from whatever they say. The fact that they suggest the aid is unrestricted in Gaza, well, clearly they're eating too much. Clearly they are too comfortable, because, as I mentioned earlier on, the hostages are still held by them. If they felt the squeeze, if they felt, oh shit, we're running out of food here and water, perhaps we surrender and we eat rather. No. They prefer keeping the hostages and playing the victim card. That's just pathetic, really pathetic.
together with the fact that the population of Gaza has actually gone up, even by Hamas's own numbers, because they're always struggling to work out whether they should say there are millions and millions of Gazans or they're all suffering and dead, and switching between the two, allows them to play both cards at once. I think there's a term in Hollywood that they use for films where they where they talk about shining a spotlight on something. If you've got a glaring hole in your plot that risks making your entire film fall apart, what they do is highlight that fact to the audience and then ignore it and move on. And that's exactly what they do in this video, because they effectively mention the fact that using the word genocide repeatedly doesn't mean it is genocide, but now we're going to prove that it's genocide. But that's exactly what they do. They just use the word genocide repeatedly, and through repetition, the repetition of assertion, they try and persuade you that is proof of it, which it is not. And neither does the proof which they're about to represent any more than continuing to repeat the word genocide as an assertion.
Yeah, I mean, as they've said in the video, people were referring to this as genocide. At the start, she said this is the first live stream genocide. Again, sort of omitting what has happened on October 7. But I mean, Michael, what do you think? You're muted.
I like how they refer to it as an offensive war. I guess it was offensive to them, but it was actually a reaction to the declaration of war from Hamas when you send 6,000 people across the border to kill, maim, behead, rape, and otherwise harm Israelis, and they run around killing people. That's what happens when a country that's stronger than you responds to that. You get pummeled, and it is absolutely absurd. It's like coming in the middle of a plot, the way they present this. Israel. It makes it sound like Israel got up one day, decided we've had enough of these people. We're just going to go in there and bomb the heck out of them. We're going to kill them. We're going to withhold aid, and we're going to commit genocide. That's the narrative. It's terrific, and it's a great narrative if you were right about starting in the middle of it. It's absolutely not. The fact that all of Gaza has been militarized with the sole aim of annihilating Israel and protecting terrorists is the story. This has been planned for a long time. The charter of this country, Gaza, if it's a country, or state or collection, which was not occupied by anyone except for Gazans, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad and a bunch of other terrorist organizations. If their sole aim was to annihilate Israel, they've done a great job in preparing for that. They decided on October 7th, 2023, that it was time to start, and that was the beginning of the war. And any sensible country would attack more strongly and do what Israel's done, and probably a lot more than what Israel's done. The U.S. Under Biden has been holding Israel back, and we'll have to see what happens going forward. And like Marco and Richard and you've said, Daniel, there are still 101 hostages stuck in Gaza, and they're not going to be released by Hamas, because Hamas has decided they can get people like Amnesty International to make these absurd advertisements on the victimization of the poor Gazans who just happen to be terrorists who are holding hostages.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the amount of hostages, and I believe it's one less. I've read in the report that IDF has recovered a body of one of the hostages again, because I'm not sure what the most recent numbers are, but it is believed that probably half of the hostages are already dead or are no longer alive. So to a large extent, this is operation about recovering bodies, and again, it's so like sad, and the way this is really shown in well, I mean, let's see how they presented us. I mean, not like there's still mention hostages and all.
The first treaty to explicitly define and criminalize genocide in international law was adopted by the United Nations in 1948 in response to the atrocities of World War II. To prove genocide has taken place, you need to show that one or more acts prohibited by the Genocide Convention was carried out and that it was committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group, in this case, Palestinians.
Okay, I just wanted to quickly comment on that because I love the use of language. You know, let's okay, guys. I know we're talking about atrocity. I know we're talking about genocide, and we are specifically referring to genocide that happened by the Nazi regime against the Jews. But let's just call it atrocities that happened during Second World War. Let's make sure we don't give like Jews any single credit, any single thing. No, they nothing has ever happened to them. I don't know if you guys want to comment on something specific in this part, because the next part is going to be much longer. There's going to be a lot there. But Michael, anything to add on this part?
Well, I think the point is what we started the discussion with, that we're talking about a genocide in World War II, which involved 10 million people that the Germans exterminated, excuse me. They killed a lot of people also. I think it was about 1 million Allied troops or so in addition, but they exterminated and they rounded up in a very industrial way and set up amazing death camps, we all know, in Auschwitz and Sobibor and so on. That's what we were talking about in World War II. There's no resemblance between that and what's going on in Gaza. None. And as far as I'm aware, you didn't have a bunch of Jews in World War II holding any Germans hostage.
Wait, but I've read history book. I've read about how Nazis during their invasion of Poland, they moved everybody from Warsaw, and they only left like the Polish army there. And then when they got Warsaw, then they moved everybody from Krakow back to Warsaw so they could take Krakow. I mean, isn't that how it happened? And then they also, of course, delivered aid to everybody and definitely didn't lock up anybody in the ghettos or concentration camps. I mean, Marco, isn't that what happened? I mean, that's the implication I'm getting right now.
Well, according to Amnesty International, whatever you wanted to happen happened. Just like this definition. I mean, just showing this clip means that they cannot deny they do not know what the actual definition of genocide is. So they start this whole thing by making up the group. I mean, Palestinian is not it's not ethnicities, is nothing. It's just a made-up word invented by what's his face? What's his name?
Arafat?
Arafat, sorry, yeah. Who was an Egyptian anyway.
Of course.
So already this definition doesn't exist because Israel is not targeting Arabs. It's targeting the criminals in Gaza, the terrorists in Gaza. And if you die in a war, you're just a casualty of war. You're not a victim of genocide. But, you know, they don't care, do they?
And you mentioned the atrocities in the Second World War with the term that this video chooses to use for it. Is it any surprise that Amnesty, like I said at the beginning, won't sign up to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance form of anti-Semitism? No, because they're trying to not talk about the Holocaust. They don't want that to be a part of any of this discussion. And when they say, in this case, Palestinians, that is their link between this footage related to World War II and to their argument, just saying in this case, Palestinians. I want to re-edit it to, in this case, Jews, because to be honest, if you look at the Hamas Charter, the intent set out in it, and the actions on October the 7th, the genocidal actions, it should say Jews, shouldn't it? No, of course not. Not according to Amnesty.
Someone in the chat says, but why bring up past when you see similarities today in front of you? Similarities to what? When you see similarities, it is you're comparing it to something. When you're saying a genocide is happening, you're looking at the past things that have happened that we've called genocide, and you're trying to compare them to this. how can you not compare it? That's the whole point. The whole reason why the word genocide is used is to bring up, basically, when you say genocide, it's not, words. When words are said, you have something under it. I think I tried to do. I think I tried to do that comparison with James. It's like me saying that Marco is a sexist, and someone asked me, "Whoa, Marco is a sexist? Why are you saying Marco is a sexist?" And I said, "Well, because Marco believes there's a differences between man and woman." And they're like, that's stupid. That's not what sexist means. That's not what people usually think of when you say sexist. And in a similar way, when you say Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians, people are thinking of the Holocaust. People are thinking Israel is putting people in a death camps. It's putting people into concentration camps. It's trying to eradicate basically the whole group of people, the whole of Gazans. They are not thinking about they are moving them from the north to the south and then from the south to the north, and they are letting them know, and they are letting them have humanitarian aid, and they are simply waging a war on the group that is
Advantage from Mass General Brigham Health Plan. Our new
they are waging a war on the group that has started a war against them. Anything you guys like to add, or should we go a bit more?
No. Happy to move on.
As part of Amnesty International's research, we have documented Israel's perpetration of 3 out of the 5 prohibited acts under the Genocide Convention since the 7th of October. These include killing members of the group, causing them serious mental or bodily harm, and inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction. For example, this would include the destruction of essential infrastructure, including homes, agricultural land, water and sanitation infrastructure, and infrastructure indispensable to the civilian population. They also include the mass repeated displacement under inhumane and unsanitary conditions, and they also include the deliberate obstruction of entry of life-saving supplies and aid.
Okay, again, I have so much to say about this one, but I want you guys to talk too. I don't want to take over this. So, I mean, Michael, again, what do you think about this part?
Well, like I said, and Israel woke up on October 7th and decided to go after Gaza and Hamas. And first of all, that's not accurate, because Israel didn't really have any kind of offensive until October 8th. That really entered. And second of all, there was a slightly important precipitating event that started this, which is actually the entire point of the entire thing. And they don't even say following the attack by Hamas that led to the death of 1,200 people and the taking of 250 hostages, because that's one of those inconvenient truths that will ruin the entire wonderful story that they've got. The second point, and then I'll pass it, is when terrorists hold civilians in front of them, whether it be because they are living in, the terrorists are occupying a hospital or a school, or of course our famous UN buildings, UNRWA, and think that that's going to be a way to prevent Israel from going after the terrorists, they got another thought coming. And when a terrorist does something like that, it immediately violates the notion that this is a protected area. A hospital that is housing terrorists is a terrorist haven. It is not a hospital. The same thing with a civilian place. You know, Hezbollah, we saw there were entire villages in southern Lebanon which were militarized. Yeah, sure, they were houses. But what do you call a house that's holding missiles? You call it a missile silo. I mean, it really, these people, they're so obviously ridiculously either stupid, which I don't think they are, or it's not even sophisticated cover up here. It's just absurd. It's great for the young generation of people who don't want to think. It's great for anyone who needs a soundbite or likes to be anti-Semitic and all. But for anybody that thinks for a minute, what does it mean when somebody is a terrorist in a hospital? It means that that hospital is in danger. And not only is that terrorist endangering themselves, but they're endangering the entire hospital.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly on that, I'm kind of young and I'm thinking about getting an apartment. And, I have a benefit from the Slovak government that as a first-time buyer, I can get like a tax credit for getting it. But getting paid from Hezbollah for allowing a rocket to be stored in your house is not the same thing. Like people again, this is not just something that it's just what it's just what Hamas does. They just have a bunch of ammunition under hospitals, and we have our government, and they have their government system. This is just not the same. Again, the way the whole thing, the way it's said as like they are just trying to uproot infrastructure for like no reason. Like there's no reason. Like Hamas is literally so embedded in the population. It's like the most basically. It's like I believe it is like the most embedded terrorist group in like a particular area in the world. There's not a single place you can find where it's so when it comes to the tunnels, when it comes to sort of the overlying of civilian versus like Hamas structures. It is all the same. There are no Hamas bases separate from civilian infrastructures in Gaza. Marco?
This section shows how evil, how deliberately evil these people are. And I'm talking about Amnesty International and whoever wrote the script for this propaganda video, because they show you the international law. Okay, so if you believe that's valid, then you have to follow it. So it's up to you to prove that the 5 criteria have been met and the intention was there in the first place in order to prove genocide. And to do that, the first thing they do, they ignore what the text actually says. The text says destruction of the group. And then they start talking about destruction of infrastructure, which has got nothing to do with genocide, even if it had occurred. Destruction of property, destruction of stuff is just part of the war. You bomb an area, and the whole point of bombing is destruction of infrastructure. So genocide doesn't mean bombing an area; it means destruction of the group of people you want to destroy. So first of all, you have to prove there is a group that Israel is going after. Second, you have to prove the other point, how Israel is trying to destroy the group. Well, by destroying stuff, it's not destroy the group. And talking about the removal of people, well, the removal of people is willingly ignoring the fact that Israel is removing people from an area before they bomb it. That's why there are people moving from north to south and south to north, because Israel says, we're going to bomb this thing to destroy infrastructure, civilians, please move out of the way. And that it's obvious that the intention of Israel is not to cause civilian casualties. So the fact that stuff on the ground has been destroyed is because, as Michael was pointing out, in breach of the Geneva Convention, these savages of Hamas and Gazans are actually hiding weapons and militant terrorists inside the hospital with equipment. And that's, if you really care about international law, that's a breach of the Geneva Convention in the first place. But you don't talk about that. You just make up that you are following international law by coming up with this made up examples. So at this point, international law, whatever you want it to be.
And there's a total absence in this montage of clips that's overlays talking of any aggressors at all in Gaza. There's not a single terrorist. There's not a single person firing rockets from Gaza into Israel or shooting at the IDF. Or holding weapons inside hospitals, or of course medical staff who also helped hold hostages in their own homes in some cases, and certainly took hostages through hospitals and all of that. None of that is here. So this reminds me of Leonard Peikoff's "A Picture Is Not an Argument" talk, because that's exactly what you're being presented. You're being presented with a set of pictures, really, a set of images of distinct, unconnected, unidentified settings, overlaid with a different narrative, which it tries to distort your interpretation of those things based on no evidence of it whatsoever. And that's despicable, because you really are concealing the evil and you're perpetuating it.
Well, How much time do we have? Well, first of all, let me remind people again that today's episode of The Reality Show is sponsored by James Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation, and Its Consequences. Let me read you a little bit from chapter 1. So, in the field of money creation, ignorance is not bliss. If you know how banks create new money, you can begin to understand how the money supply grows, its source, who benefits, and who is harmed. But if, like most experts, you perceive commercial banks as mere financial intermediaries transferring money from a saver to a borrower, you won't understand their unique economic importance. Nor will you know how their legal privilege to create money can work for good or ill, depending on who makes money creation decisions. So you can get the book on Amazon. A link to that is both in the chat and in the description. And also all royalties go towards the support of Ayn Rand Centre UK. So you can educate yourself and also help us stay on air. As I always say, I consider money the most the greatest invention, the greatest technology we have ever came up as a sort of humanity, because it allows us for long-range thinking. It allows us to trade our productivity, and it allows us to save our production for future consumption. And understanding how, how it works, how money creation itself works, is important to this aspect. We have a super chat from Loricetto. Thank you so much. He says, actual genocide has a unique characteristic. It is ongoing, IG. During the Second World War, the affected group could not stop the process by surrendering. I mean, that's... I don't know if that is an actual part of... I don't think it's an actual part of the Genocide Convention itself, but it is definitely something... we should consider that if it's not, then the convention itself might be problematic. Because again, if Palestinians surrender tomorrow, there's nothing. There's not going to be any more killing. There's not going to be any sort of thing you would expect from an actual genocide. It's not like the Jews or the prisoners of war during Second World War in the Nazi camps could just surrender and suddenly it was all going to be okay, or nothing was going to happen to them. But let's continue.
It is clear the Israel authorities have deliberately inflicted these conditions and knew they would inevitably result in a deadly mix of hunger and disease, which brings us to the other important component of the crime, the intent to destroy.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
So just a quick comment on what Israeli President Herzog has said. And they even had the date there, October 14, 2023. Again, what are you supposed to take away with? That Herzog, and although I might understand with this settlement, but he supposedly has been saying that, basically Palestinians, Hamas, it's all the same. And we would believe it. I think I would agree with that. That was sort of the thing you were supposed to take away from it. But he was talking about specifically October 7. He was saying that Palestinians themselves, separate from Hamas, have participated in October 7. That's what he was referring to. That's why he was saying the idea that civilians were not part of this is a lie. That's what he was saying. And that's true. Again, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that Palestinians themselves didn't participate in October 7? Or are you, again, trying to put out a fake rhetoric to say something about Israel or say something about Herzog that wasn't really said? I mean, Michael, what do you think?
Look, again, I think this is when Israel gets a little bit into the rabbit hole of answering a question that really probably shouldn't have been asked. And, when the Germans elected Hitler, whether you liked him or not, you were stuck with Hitler as as your leader, and Hitler did things that led to the ultimate destruction of Germany, and every German suffered for that. And that's what happens when you elect. And these people elected, I mean, you can't say they elected a terrorist organization and then say, well, they made a mistake, so you should be kinder to them. It's either people are responsible for their actions or they're not. They elected a terrorist organization that chose to go to war with Israel, and Israel needed to fight back. And of course, Israel's fighting back. And as I've said, really with one arm, with a hand behind their back. So it's almost irrelevant whether there were regular civilians. Now, we also have a pretty good idea that of the 6,000 people from Gaza that came into Israel, it's been said that about half of them were actual known Hamas operatives, and the other half were not. So if you're not a Hamas person and you're not Islamic Jihad, what are you? You're a civilian. So, but again, I think the question is the wrong question. A government declares war on another country, that country's stronger, the world didn't come to Hamas's aid, and they're suffering for it, full stop. And like you said, and I think it was a good point, I don't think it's part of the definition of genocide, but you can do a simple test, and that is to say that if Hamas surrenders, and they've been offered, by the way, they've been offered surrender, which didn't include their complete annihilation. It was, you have to get out of Gaza. You can go to any number of Arab countries that will take you. And by the way, there aren't many Arab countries left that will take them, including Qatar now, which says something also. But of course, that's, I'm sure, the Jews' fault as well. But Hamas could easily end the war. And the destruction would stop. And then lots of people want to put money in there. And there'll be an attempt to rebuild the place. And we won't discuss today questions of like who's going to actually manage this place and rebuild it in a way that doesn't recapitulate the militant locations that were set up there. So I don't know that it's helpful, actually, even to worry about whether they're civilians or not. The civilians elected Hamas. That's who they have.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, someone in the chat says they elected Hamas as if they had another option. So first of all, the election that happened, that was probably the most free election outside of Israel in the Middle East. And also, well, they've had few choices. Even the choice of Fatah was there, and they've chose the most radical group that was running. So again, even if you want to make a case that they had no other choice, so they voted for Hamas, they specifically picked, and whenever they are asked in the polls, they're specifically picking the most radical, the most extremist parts of the Palestinian culture, to whatever extent there is a more moderate part of the Palestinian culture. I mean,
sorry to jump in here, but
yeah.
I think that argument seems to me to be patently, it's not our responsibility to worry about whether the elections were free or not. Are you saying that Russia is not responsible for Putin? That the Russians are not responsible because they elected Putin? And we all know that the elections in Russia are not real. But suddenly we become the arbiters now of elections across the world? That's where we're going with this? And it's up to us to decide whether people have enough choices. Maybe we should set up a Democratic Party to be in Hamas too, and we can give them that option. People are responsible for their situations. The whole world is not set up to take care of everyone. We can't.
Marco?
Well, Ayn Rand, in an answer to a question, said that you cannot insulate the citizens of a government from the action of their own government. So, you can pick up some sort of resistance like the French did during the Vichy Republic, but, they're not doing this, clearly, are they? But the point is that going back to the definition of genocide, destruction of the group, and then in their own video, they show you the IDF destroying infrastructure that the terrorists have used or are using. So they're not targeting the group, they're targeting the infrastructure that the group is being using to attack Israel. So that in itself is a deliberately twisting the words of the definition of genocide, which, by the way, was invented to refer to the genocide of the Jews. That's why the legislation is from 1948. And to the point about Palestinians are Hamas. Well, Francesca Albanese herself, in a tweet, made the point that every German was a Nazi during the Second World War. So in the same way, every Palestinian is Hamas. So why applying two different definitions for two different groups? Because clearly you want to bolster a group versus the other one, and intent to destroy. Well, yes, Israel has intent to destroy the infrastructure, the hundreds of miles of tunnel that the Gazans have dug with the money that they were supposed to use in order to improve the situation for their own citizens. So yes, the intent of Israel to destroy Hamas, not to destroy the Arabs. In fact, Arabs live freely in the Middle East only in Israel. Only in Israel, Arabs can choose their own government, choose the way they want to live, but certainly not in Gaza. And so, yes, Israel should destroy, if it doesn't have the intent to destroy, should destroy, wipe out every single piece of Hamas, every single piece of Islamic ideology, which is causing this war over and over again.
And when you look at that intent to destroy, they seem appalled that intent is proven by a 3, 2, 1 countdown. That's what intent is, isn't it? Yes, they do. And as you guys have just said, that yes, they do have intent to destroy Hamas infrastructure and Hamas's ability to fight. And yes, that can include counting down from 3 before you press the button, not indiscriminately firing rockets like Hamas do into Israel without a countdown. But whatever. And then on this point about the lack of volition, the lack of agency of every Gazan, you then have people who refuse to recognize when these people do display their volition and their agency, cheering as hostages are dragged into Gaza on October the 7th, celebrating the fact that they've been taken hostage. Those are their actions, following in with the Hamas terrorists across the border on October the 7th to carry out the same kind of activities and to steal and attack, rob, rape, Israelis wherever they can find them. So there is no distinction between the two. That's what Herzog is referring to, and that he's absolutely right to do so. And it's ridiculous to not to recognize that point.
Okay, so it looks like again we won't have time to go through the whole video, but let's watch a bit more, just so we watch.
These racist, dehumanizing and genocidal statements call for the annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza and making Gaza unlivable. They provide evidence for Israel's intent to physically destroy Palestinians. As part of Amnesty International's research, we reviewed over 100 statements made by Israeli officials, and these statements clearly were echoed by Israeli soldiers on the ground.
Specific genocidal intent should be assessed through analysing the most recent conflict, while taking into account a system of apartheid, a brutal occupation, and the 17-year unlawful blockade of Gaza, a history of systematic human rights violations built on the continuous dehumanization of Palestinians.
It's genocidal intent and a case of apartheid and a brutal occupation and then the 17-year-old unlawful blockade. Sorry, I mean, yeah, just put out as many words as you can. I mean, they've already redefined apartheid in the past, so it's what we sometimes do on these shows. If we have like a show a week before where we sort of like explain a certain context or sort of like set out ground for an episode after, where we talk about something that we build upon it, and that's what they are doing here. They're as someone says in the chat, it's like they're just playing bingo card. Like they put out all these statements as close to each other as possible. And just a quick comment, because she said they've reviewed over 100 statements from Israeli politicians, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, that seems like very little. Like that's it. Like I feel like we've reviewed more statements from Israeli politicians on these shows. It seems like a bit little when it comes to genocide, which the most important part of genocide is the mens rea aspect, the intent to actually commit genocide. It's not, genocide is not something that you just randomly like kill a lot of people, or you happen to kill a lot of people because of because you're in war. There is an actual intent that has to be proven. And yeah, I mean, Marco, are 100 statements enough?
Well, clearly the intent has been demonstrated is the opposite, isn't it? As I mentioned earlier on, Israel deliberately moved the civilians away from a bombing. But this woman talks about genocidal statement. Whoa! Now you can genocide a nation just making a statement. Wow, that's lowering the bar, isn't it? If you want to talk about genocidal statement, read the Hamas's own charter in the 80s. That was quite genocidal, wasn't it? But to be honest, it wouldn't matter if you make genocidal statements. It's the actions you take after that. It's the action that Hamas and the PA and the PLO have been taking. Not only they promise death to Jews, destruction of Israel, and through Iran, destruction of the great Satan in the West. They actually do it, and that's what makes genocide. They are the genocidal ones. Just promise somebody, oh, I want to wipe you out of from the face of the planet. Well, it's not quite the same, is it?
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but Michael has to leave soon. So, Michael, any just thoughts you'd like to say, and also where can people find you before you go?
Yeah, it goes back to making sure you add 1 and 1 and 2. And the last point I would make, I think, on this whole thing is, since this has all been going on for 17 years, I think the real question is why nobody had a big problem with it before, with all this horror, because it clearly didn't start even on October 8th, based on what they just said. It started 17 years ago, the illegal blockade. What are they talking about? And you should ask yourself what all this support for this area came in, and what did the money go to? And it went into a marvelous tunnel system for the terrorists, the vast majority of it, as well as missiles. Michael Kaufman, LinkedIn with 2 Fs on Kaufman. Thanks, everybody. Sorry, I got to run.
Yeah,
bye-bye.
No worries. We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says no mention of Egypt, who also blockades Gaza. Just wait for the next report. Egypt is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. I wouldn't hold your breath. But Richard, anything to add?
Well, just the wall that separates Gaza from Israel was put up to stop terrorists from doing exactly what they did on October the 7th, the moment they could breach it. So it's not a blockade of Gaza; it's a blockade of terrorism from entering your country, which is I'd like to see a blockade of terrorists from entering the UK and blowing up pop concerts and attacking people on London bridges. That's the purpose of it. That's the intent.
Yeah, I don't want to finish the video. If you guys want, I'll put the description. I'll put in the description the link to the video. I feel like we could easily change the channel to Amnesty International because it is truly despicable. The use of language, the intentional either misusing statements, misusing out of context statements, out of context basically evidence or things taken. I mean, it's the whole thing is a mess, and there is a purpose behind it. The purpose is clear. It is to attack in Israel in any way they can to stop. I mean, at the end they go to say that there needs to be action for Israel to stop. For Israel to stop what? For Israel to stop defending itself. For Israel to stop actually being able to defend its own citizens. And they are using the word genocide because of the implication, because of the way people take it, and are completely destroying the concept in the process. But Marco, anything to add? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, spoiler alert, if you want to watch this thing until the end, don't listen to this bit, because in the end, the video cuts back to the crazy woman who says something like, we must make sure we use tribunal, ICC and governments to end the genocide. effectively, at the end of the video, they've made up their mind. It is genocide, despite the fact that they've proven throughout the video and by denying exactly what the legislation said about genocide, they come to the conclusion it is genocide. So, they could have saved us, 6 minutes of life and just say Israel is genociding everyone and just get on with it.
And you'll miss the bit at the end, of course, where they show things like press vests on the ground among the rubble as well, despite the fact we've seen Hamas terrorists wearing press vests or swapping them over from one shift to another before firing on the IDF. We've seen endless shots within the course of this video of shrouds.
Hey, times are tough. People have to take 2 jobs. I mean, what are you saying?
Yeah, and everyone's a terrorist as well. Well, it's one of the jobs, isn't it? And of course, even within those shrouds, some of them have to also take the job of pretending to be dead for a bit whilst they're filming a video of someone in a shroud, since those shrouds often sit up or when they're dropped whilst being carried, sometimes get up and run when they realize they've been abandoned because they're being, there's attack in the area or whatever. So
Jesus did it, so they did it as well.
Yeah, but you're not even allowed to consider that those shrouds can contain terrorists as well, for example. So I mean, the whole thing is designed to work on an emotionless level with images instead of thinking, with no context at any point, and you've already got the message up front announced by the Secretary General of Amnesty International, to whom you should give no money.
So yeah, hopefully we won't have to talk about Amnesty International anytime soon, or for at least some time. But we will be back, of course, tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Let me remind people again that today's episode of the reality show is sponsored by James Brown's new book, A Black Hole in Economics, Money Creation, and its consequences. Link to the you can find it on Amazon, but also in Kindle version if you're not a paperback like I am. I prefer either audiobooks and Kindle versions. I have to ask him about audiobook. We need to get that one also out, but you can find link to the Amazon in the chat and in the description. Again, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you.
That there is a clip from where Jim explained in his own words about the content of the book. It's in the video section of ARCUK, so have a look at it.
Yeah, so you can find that on the channel, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Thank you everybody, and bye-bye.